بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين وهو خير ناصر ومعين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعليه الطاهرين ولعنة الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. Now we said that we will continue from Sheikh Mufid. So we are looking at Sheikh Mufid, who was born in 948 current era and he died in 1022. So he was born during the time of right after the minor occultation. Minor occultation is 941. That's the beginning of major occultation after 941. So he was a student of Ibn Jamid, and he was the one who had that usuli sort of mind, unlike the Akhbaris. You have the two schools, you have the Akhbaris and the usulis. What difference is there? Perhaps we could look at in one of the future programs. But we just wanted to look at how the scholars protected the fiqh, the Islamic law, and transferred to the future generation. And what we have today and what we are practicing today is something that was practiced by the Imams themselves, and it is something that comes from the Imams. So now the Mufid period, where you have the Buyid dynasty, and what happens is after the downfall of the Buyid dynasty, you have the Seljuks. Seljuks came to power in 1037 to 1194 current era. Now Seljuks were Sunni dynasty, and they were lenient to the Abbasids. Abbasids were towards Spain and towards the western parts, Turkey, and that was in their control. And as a matter of fact, Abbasids, they were still involved with the Crusades. Crusades take place. They were more involved with the external forces rather than the internal disputes, Shia Sunni disputes, so on and so forth, as it was during the period of the Khilafat of the Abbasiyun or the Khilafat of the Umayyun. The outer danger wasn't really there for them. It was more of an internal pressure for them, where they have to really crush the Shia belief system, or the Shias, or the followers of the Imams. But later on, when you have the Fatimids coming in, that itself is a deterioration of the Abbasid period, and the Abbasid period deteriorated with the Turks entering into the military, and those who took power, and they were the commanders in the military force of the Abbasids eventually, and they did a coup and they came to power as well. So now let's just look at what I wanted to do was that wanted to point out to that there was a room provided in which the Shia scholars established universities, or hawzas if you want to call. You have Sheikh Mufid. He trained Sayyid Murtuza and Sayyid Razi. These two brothers are famous for Nahjul Balagha. The Nahjul Balagha that we have today, which is the book of the sermons of Amirul Mu'mineen, letters of Amirul Mu'mineen, sayings of Amirul Mu'mineen, was compiled by these two brothers in this period, which is, we are looking at the period of 20 current era. We are in 2016 now. We are talking about 16 around that period. So now here Sheikh Mufid trains Sayyid Murtuza, Sayyid Razi, and Sheikh Tusi, according to some reports, that he was also a student of Sheikh Tusi. Now what happens is Baghdad becomes the center of education. Sayyid Murtuza, they says he had about 80,000 books, personal private books in his own library. Now, Sayyid Murtuza has amazing contribution in the field of ethics, in the field of theology, and in the field of jurisprudence. Books on usul has been written. Sayyid Murtuza was known as Alamul Huda. Alamul Huda was a title given by Amirul Mu'mineen. When one of the Abbasid king, because we are looking at Seljuk dynasty now, influenced by the Abbasids, one of the Abbasi kings become very ill, and in his dream he sees Amir al-Mu'mineen, and Amir al-Mu'mineen says that asks Alam al-Huda to make dua for you. So who is Alim al-Huda? It is Sayyid Murtaza. Now here the Abbasi king writes the letter to Sayyid Murtaza saying that you pray for me because you are Alim al-Huda. And who gave this title? Amir al-Mu'mineen. And I should have mentioned this earlier. Sheikh Mufid, who was the first Usuli, founding father of the Usuli thought, talked about Usuli fiqh. He was given the title of Mufid by Imam Zaman. There are 4 tawqi'at. Tawqi means that a letter that comes from Imam Zaman to the scholar. And this is not basically through these Nawabin, with a miracle, kind of. And he was miraculously protected by Imam Zaman, the Sheikh Mufid, as we know the famous story of that pregnant lady who they asked that what shall we do? Shall we, as the lady was pregnant and she died, shall we bury the lady alive or shall we take the baby out, before we bury? Sheikh Mufid apparently gave the verdict that you bury the woman alive. Then later on somebody came and said, no, Mufid changed his verdict, fatwa, take the baby out, and the baby was protected. And Mufid was informed later on, he was really disappointed and upset. He closed his door and he did not want to give any more fatwas. Then the letter comes from Imam Zaman saying that, oh Mufid, you are our helper, you are Mufid, you are our great supporter, you give verdict and we correct you. Imam Zaman says, we will protect you, we will correct you, give fatwa. So then after that he trained, that title was given by Imam Zaman and he was known as Sheikh Mufid. His books we have today, Kitabul Irshad, translated, one of the history books that we have. Other than that, fiqh books, law books we have from him. Then he trained Sayyid Murtaza, who was Ali ibn al-Hussein ibn Musa ibn Muhammad ibn Musa ibn Ibrahim ibn Kazim, Imam Kazim alayhi salam. He is from the lineage of Imam Kazim, who was known as Sayyid Murtaza. Sayyid Murtaza also was an Usuli. Then we find that there's a very important relationship with Sayyid Murtaza and his student who was Sheikh Tusi. Sheikh Tusi was the one who established the seminary of Najaf, and this happened after the invasion of Genghis Khan, who came to Baghdad, who burnt Baghdad down, and Sheikh Tusi fled to Najaf and he established the school there. And it was there basically where we find that how he trained and he protected many the Islamic law, books of law, hadith, riwayat, and then obviously he kind of passed on the knowledge to his students. Then after that you find Shaykh Awwal, who comes from Lebanon, who was such a great scholar. Muhammad al-Makki, his name was. He was known to be the Imam of the Maliki as well. He would give a fatwa on Maliki and it was considered as an authority. We find Iraq, Lebanon, and Ali ibn Babawai like in Iran, and other scholars as well, all from different schools that they were established, and also Syria and Aleppo. They all taught and trained themselves in Islamic jurisprudence, in fiqh, and protected it and handed down from student to student till it reaches to us today. I'm pretty sure if you ask Ayatollah Sistani or Ayatollah Khamenei, or for example as any of the present Maraje, he would say that we could trace our lineage of our asatid, of our teachers, till the Imams. So it is a fiqh that is well protected, a fiqh that is very rich and transferred from heart to heart, from student to student, and we have that today, and that's what we practice. So this is how the sciences of jurisprudence was protected. The science of fiqh, the knowledge of fiqh was protected, and it kind of handed down to us. Now, Islam is not just ahkam and laws, as we earlier saw. In terms of the philosophers, we have seen the Islamic history of philosophy, how the thought developed, how it kind of synthesized the Platonic, the Aristotelian, the Greek, and it came up with a new sort of version which was organic, which was based upon the Quran and teachings of the Prophet. Then in the field of science, medicine, pharmacology, astronomy, astrology, geology, history, we have seen how it has developed, how it has contributed to the world. Now, we will look into our last section in regards to the sciences, in regards to the Islamic sciences. We have seen different domains of science, is the art and literature. Islamic art and Islamic literature. What's its contribution? Where does it really come from, Islamic art? And it is quite important for our youth to really know how art is so important and what contribution Islam have done towards art. As you know, that art is the indication of a living reality. Art is something, if art have remained today, if art is there, that means it is living reality, right? And in order, for a civilization to really subsist and survive, art is very important. Through art, a civilization survives. So therefore, if we have living art, that means the civilization is alive as well. If we have art as an authority, that means the civilization is also an authority. So today we find Islamic art all over Muslim lands still there, and even that art and architecture and the principles of this art and architecture, the value of this art and architecture being exported, being used in sort of like Western art as well. Like if you look, if one really wants to trace down the art, we would look at, for example, the source of art, which becomes that, Inna Allah Jamilun wa yuhibbul Jamal, which means Allah is beautiful, as the Prophet have said, and He loves beauty. So Allah is the one who Himself is beautiful, because beauty has an enormous amount of effect upon art. Obviously, art is beautiful, right? So therefore Allah loves beauty. So this automatically promotes art within Islam. Hence, this becomes the essence of Islamic art. The essence of Islamic art becomes God. Art also signifies cleanliness, purity, clean, right? And as a matter of fact, cleanliness is considered to be part of Iman. Cleanliness is part of a person who is clean, and some hadith it says half of Iman. So one have to be clean, one's room have to be clean, one's house have to be clean, because it is part of our faith. A Muslim is a clean person, and art, for example, cleanliness have a great effect upon art. The art obviously needs to be clean and perfect, right? So if now when we look at the Islamic cities, we would find that how the planning of city is based on that sort of Islamic ethos, Islamic value. Upon that art, in its essence, it has God. So the way city will be designed, the way houses will be designed, the way mosque and masajid will look, the way the artwork in the masajid, in the houses and in the cities would be. The gardens will be reflecting the gardens of the heaven. the theme that it would have, for example. So as in the Islamic art, the essential aspect is God. So when one would ponder or contemplate or look at Islamic art, he will automatically remember God. If we pay attention to the great masterpieces of Islamic art, such as the Mosque of Cordoba, the Grand Mosque of Cordoba in Spain. If we look at the Grand Mosque of Qayrawan in Tunis, or if you look at the Ibn Tulun in Cairo, or in Far East, or for example, the mosque in Turkey, or in Isfahan, or in Iran and Samarkand, all in all, they all represent nothing but that very spirit which is in Islam, and that is the Quran. So it is a reflection of that. So if one wants to really know what Islam is, it is sufficient enough for him to really focus upon the Islamic art, then he would understand what really Islam means. Because it reflects that. The same way, as the Quran have an external and internal. The external is also important, which means that Arabic language, which means that's true pronunciation, which one have to really educate and have to be precise in that pronunciation. And at the same time, the Quran have that internal aspect, which is actually the spirit, which is actually the meaning, which is actually the true substance, the batini, the inner aspect of the Quran, which is the reflection of that tawheed, which is the reflection of that spirituality, reflection of harmony, peace, tranquility. So therefore, when one looks at these grand mosques or Islamic art, you would find all of that in it. If you just enter a mosque, you will have that, feeling of awe, that feeling of spirit, the feeling of peace, the feeling of tranquility, the feeling of harmony once you enter that mosque, because the art is reflecting that. So the same way the cities were made, the same way the houses were made, the same way the madrasas and the schools and the universities were made, which all reflected nothing but the divine. So the life of a human being, the life of a man will always be within the Islamic art, and the Islamic art will be reflecting nothing but the divine itself. So man is always reminded. So as insan, as a human being, he is always forgetful. There is nisyan, where he forgets. So therefore, as he is forgetful, then when he is around this Islamic art, whether that be in his house, whether that be in the city, whether that be in the university that he is studying, whether he goes to a park and he sits there, unconsciously he is reminded of the divine. A garden that is designed in an Islamic fashion, a garden that kind of reflects the Islamic art, which really reminds a person of the Jannah, whether a person consciously be aware of that design or not, it will be affected unconsciously, and he will be in the presence of the divine. The same applies for his house. When he enters that house, and if he designed it, and the piece of art that he has, the artifacts that he has in his house, the light, the reflection of the light, the carpet, so on and so forth, then he will be reminded unconsciously of God. He will be protected. So therefore, Islamic art is nothing but a medium through which God is protected. That's what Islamic art is. That's what it is reflected. It's the reflection of that divine unity. That's why you would see, the masajid, the way it is constructed from multiplicity, the dome going to that unity. You have that multiplicity as the dome, and it kind of ends up with that sort of like point of tawheed. The carpets tend to reflect that as well, the design, and that there's a center. The center is nothing but that tawheed. The center is nothing but that very God. The minarets as well. The way, for example, the Quran talks about that when you leave the house or when you enter the house, you enter towards the Qibla, for example. The kitchen, the garden, the backyard, the front, all kind of have certain sort of implications that, divine is reflected in that. Then after that, you have this technique of, fun, which is Arabic. Fun means technique, and hikmat is a combination of these two. There is wisdom in it, and there is fun as well. The artist sort of with his technique brings about those verses of the Quran, those divine messages within the art. And that's what, when a person is with it, he's at peace with his nature. Then after that is the literature. Obviously the greatest point of literature, if you look at, or even art if you want to say, is the art of reciting. The Quranic chatting, that is an art. Quranic chatting, the sawt, the tartil, the beautiful recitation, how Muslims practice and how peaceful it is. It is an art in itself that the Prophet have asked us that we teach our children to recite the Quran in the beautiful voice, in a beautiful manner. That methodology, of sawt and tartil should be recited precisely. That is an art which and it is alive today. And even today, among the Muslims, we see that how much of emphasis is placed upon the recital, upon the chanting of the Quran. So therefore, we see that the art, which is the reflection of the divine, which is nothing but the manifestation of that very sort of divine nature, the spirit of it is the revelation, is the Quran. Then we will enter into literature. Now, obviously in literature you have the Quran as a book, the recital, and then after that you have the hadith literature, then you have the poetry, so much emphasis on poetry, the eloquency, how Islam pays attention to the eloquency. The Quran itself is it's not a poetry, but it's a so eloquent, poetic way written. And then you find the scholars, they write their books in a poetry format. It could be a book in Arabic grammar, on morphology, on syntax, but it is written in the poetic way. That's the emphasis upon the literature, how much is paid. Inshallah, as the time will not allow us to really look into, we will in our next program look at literature and we'll try to conclude the sciences, and at the same time we have to look at religion in the modern world so that we could compare this sort of the whole sort of science and knowledge that we have and where it fits in terms of our modernity or the modern world that we live in today. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you next week again, Wednesday, same time on Hidayat. And please stay with us and follow us also online. You can log on to Hidayat on YouTube and see our previous program and catch up where we have reached. Thank you and good night from Hidayat. Good night.